I sat on that weathered bench outside Vanderbilt, hands clenched so tight my fingers went numb, as if I could anchor myself to something real in a world that had just collapsed. Around me, spring had arrived like it always did. Dogwoods blooming, the sun flirting with the hospital's mirrored glass, but none of it touched me. I was behind glass now too, emotionally, spiritually, watching life move forward while mine had been frozen in a single ICU room. Behind those walls, Daniel was dying. Quietly, quickly. And I could do nothing but sit in this purgatory of hope and helplessness, pretending I wasn't already mourning him. Passers-by laughed about lunch plans and garden centers while I sat there, hollow, choking on the brutal unfairness of it all. I would have given anything to be one of them. Just another woman with sunscreen in her purse, and no idea that love can be ripped from you with surgical precision. Daniel used to be indestructible. Not in the way superheroes are, but in the way that made you believe the world couldn't touch him. He built things with his hands, rocking chairs, shelves, dreams. 12-hour days never tired him. He'd come home, dusty and smiling, still asking how my shift went, still making dinner like fatigue was just a rumor. His laughter filled our little house like insulation against the hard winters of life. When he held me, the noise in my head went quiet. That kind of safety. It doesn't come around twice in one lifetime. And now all I could do was watch him vanish inch by inch, like sand slipping through a crack in the floorboard. 6 months ago, we were planning a vacation we couldn't afford. A dog, a bigger house, children. And now I counted the beeps of his monitor and prayed it wouldn't stop mid-sentence. It started like all tragedies do. Quietly. A little more tired than usual, he said. Just a long day. But the days kept getting longer, and his color paler. He started bruising from nothing. Just sleeping the wrong way could leave a bloom of purple on his skin. One night I woke to him gasping, clawing at his chest like his lungs were filled with ghosts. And I knew. Not what it was yet, but that something terrible had found us. We walked into that hematologist's office thinking maybe it was stress, or something vitamin-shaped. Instead, we were handed a word so clinical, so cruel. Aplastic anemia. The doctor's mouth kept moving, but the only thing I heard was severe. Bone marrow shutting down. His own body was erasing him from the inside. We were told a transplant was the only way. Stem cells. Donor match. Ideally a sibling. I didn't have to look at Daniel to know the silence that followed wasn't hesitation. It was history. He had no family. No biological ties. Grew up in the shadows of the foster system. Passed from hand to hand like a secret no one wanted to keep. He didn't even know if he had a real name before Daniel Carter. The National Registry became our Hail Mary. But the odds were cruel. Matches were rare. Time was short. I started waking up at night to the sound of him whispering, not to me, but to some silent God, asking not to be saved, but for me to be strong enough to live without him. I cried in the bathroom every single night, biting towels so the sound wouldn't reach him. And still, I tried to be the nurse, the strong wife, the anchor, smiling through every appointment, saying things like, "We'll beat this," while my insides burned with the guilt of already grieving him. Then came the moment that split my world open. The doctor's voice low, almost apologetic. "Emily, we're running out of options." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I walked out into the hospital courtyard, numb, broken, desperate. That's when I heard it. 2 nurses on break, talking like this was just another day. "He looks just like that guy from Pine Hollow," one of them said. "It's uncanny." That's all it took. A random, careless sentence from someone who didn't even know they were holding a match. And suddenly, For the first time in weeks, I felt something I thought I'd buried for good. Hope. Sharp, reckless, and alive. Pine Hollow. Even the name sounded like something out of a forgotten memory. Quiet, worn at the edges, dusted with the kind of stories people don't write down. It was 2 hours from Nashville, a place I'd only visited once back in nursing school during a rural outreach rotation. I remembered slow traffic, gravel roads, and the kind of people who waved even if they didn't know you. I had no address, no name, just a fragment of a sentence, overheard by accident, clung to out of desperation. I knew it might be nothing. People look like each other all the time, but something deep inside me, something ancient and mothered by love, refused to let it go. If there was even a sliver of a chance that Daniel had family, a real, living relative, someone who could save him, then I would knock on every door in that town until my voice gave out. That night, I sat beside Daniel as he slept, studying every inch of his face like I was trying to memorize a fading photograph. His lashes fluttered like a child's. His chest rose and fell with a machine's rhythm. There were tubes where there used to be kisses. I whispered into the quiet, "I'm going to fix this. I swear to you, I'm going to try." The next morning, I took emergency leave from work. My boss didn't ask questions, just hugged me with that look nurses give each other when no words will help. I packed a bag without knowing what I was packing for. I had Daniel's photo saved in my phone, and one fragile thread of possibility wrapped around my chest like armor. Before I left, I stopped by his hospital room. He was awake, eyes brighter than I expected. "You look like you're about to take on the world," he said weakly, his voice tinged with warmth and confusion. I kissed his forehead. "Maybe I am." The drive to Pine Hollow felt like something out of someone else's life. The city shrank behind me as telephone poles blurred into rolling fields and two-lane roads framed by bare trees and rusted fences. I passed roadside fruit stands, abandoned barns, and the occasional mailbox leaning like it had grown tired of holding on. By the time I crossed the rickety wooden bridge into town, the sky had started to bruise. A soft drizzle clung to my windshield like breath on glass, and I found myself praying, really praying for the first time in a long time. Not to some abstract God, but to anyone listening. Anyone who had ever known loss or love, or the desperation of not being ready to say goodbye. I parked outside the general store, a tiny place with warped wood siding, faded hand-painted signs, and a creaky screen door that squealed when I pushed it open. The man behind the counter looked like he'd been part of the building since it was built. Kind eyes, strong hands, and a face that had seen 1,000 quiet winters. I walked up to him with my phone clutched like a lifeline. "I'm looking for someone," I said, voice trembling. "I don't know his name, but people say he looks like this." I turned the screen toward him. It was a photo of Daniel from last spring, before the bruises, before the hospital, before his skin turned to parchment and his smile to shadow. The man stared for a long beat. Then he nodded slowly. "You're probably talking about Luke Henderson. Lives out on County Road 6. Yeah, he does look like that. Weird." He gave me directions in that old country way, landmarks instead of street names. "Turn at the rusted silo. Go past the old church with the broken steeple. If you see the scarecrow with a beer can hat, you've gone too far." I thanked him and stumbled back out into the gray afternoon, my heart thudding like it was trying to break free. Every mile down that cracked road felt like a dare. What if I was wrong? What if he wasn't family? What if I was chasing a ghost? But then I thought of Daniel lying in that hospital bed, whispering prayers to gods he didn't believe in, and I kept driving. The mailbox said Henderson, white paint peeling, barely legible. The house behind it was modest, worn by time, surrounded by corn stubble and the slow decay of rural life. I parked at the edge of the drive and sat for a minute, breathing in through my nose, out through my mouth, trying to steady the quake inside me. Then I stepped out into the drizzle and walked toward the porch. Each wooden step groaned under my weight, protesting like it knew how much I was carrying. I knocked. Once, twice. Silence. Then, finally, the door creaked open. He was taller than I expected. Broad, weathered. His hair was darker than Daniel's, but his eyes. God, his eyes. Same blue, same tilt, same intensity, like they could see through a lie without trying. He looked at me with suspicion edged in curiosity. "Can I help you?" he asked. His voice was deep, gravelly, the sound of someone who hadn't had to soften their words for strangers in years. I swallowed and held out my phone, the picture glowing between us. "This is my husband," I said. "His name is Daniel Carter." People said, "You look like him." He stared at it for a long time, his brow furrowed, jaw set tight. Then he whispered something that made my knees weaken. "Well, I'll be damned." He stepped aside, and I crossed the threshold like I was walking into a parallel life. The inside of the house smelled like motor oil and old coffee, wood smoke clinging to the walls. The furniture was mismatched and lived in, a life arranged out of necessity, not design. He motioned to a chair. I sat, barely trusting my legs. The photo of Daniel still glowed on my phone screen, between us like a question neither of us wanted to ask out loud. "You're saying he's your husband?" he asked again, like he needed to hear it one more time to believe it. I nodded, hands gripping the strap of my bag like it was the only thing holding me together. "He's in the hospital," I said. "Very sick. He needs a bone marrow transplant. But they said he has no family, no matches. Then I heard about you." My voice cracked. "I had to come." He didn't answer right away, just stared at the photo again, his expression folding in on itself. Memory, confusion, disbelief. Shadows passed across his face in quiet waves. Then finally, in a voice so low I almost missed it, he said, "I think he might be my brother." I blinked, the words sinking in like warm stones dropped into freezing water. "Your brother?" He nodded slowly. "Our mom wasn't much of a mother, always drifting, always pregnant. Had a bunch of kids, different dads. When I was little, I remember her giving birth to a boy. Said she wasn't keeping him. Signed some papers at the hospital and left him there like it was nothing." He rubbed a hand over his face. "I was too young to stop her, but I never forgot. I've always wondered where he ended up, what kind of man he became." The air in the room shifted. I could feel it, like something sacred had been unearthed. A name, a past, a chance. "He's spent his whole life thinking he had no one," I whispered. "He used to sit out on the porch and ask what it would be like to have a sibling. He thought it was a fantasy, something you make up to survive." Luke stood up abruptly, pacing toward the window. "I didn't even know his name," he said, shaking his head. Then he turned back to me, and his voice was firm, resolute. "I'll do it. I don't need to think about it. If he's my brother and I can help, of course I'll do it." He grabbed his truck keys off the counter like he was going to the store, not to possibly save someone's life. "When do we leave?" I stared at him, stunned. In my mind, I had rehearsed a speech. I thought I'd have to plead, to prove that Daniel was worth saving. I never imagined someone would just say yes. No hesitation, no conditions. "Now," I said. "We go now." The rain had thickened into steady sheets as we pulled out of his driveway. He followed me the entire way, his truck rumbling behind mine like a guardian from another lifetime. I kept glancing in the mirror, half expecting him to turn around, to vanish like the whole thing had been a dream conjured by grief. But he didn't. He stayed with me the whole 2-hour drive, through winding roads and the edge of twilight. And when the hospital lights finally came into view, I realized something that made my chest tighten. I wasn't alone anymore. I had walked into Pine Hollow chasing a whisper, and I was returning with a brother. Inside Vanderbilt, the air felt heavier. The quiet was deeper, more expectant. I led Luke through the halls I'd come to know by heart. The faint hum of fluorescent lights, the smell of antiseptic, and too many prayers unanswered. When we reached Daniel's room, I stopped just outside the door. Daniel was awake, sitting propped up by pillows, IVs snaking into his arms, his skin the color of cold milk. He looked up, and his eyes lit up when he saw me, but then shifted, squinting past me toward the stranger at my side. His brow furrowed. "Emily, who's this?" I couldn't speak. Not yet. Luke stepped forward, voice thick with something primal and shaking. "I think I'm your brother." The words landed like thunder in the room. Daniel stared at him, mouth slightly open, eyes filling so fast it was like a dam had broken inside him. "My brother," he echoed, voice barely audible. Luke nodded. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. But here I am." He took a step closer. "We'll talk later. About everything. But right now, I'm here to help you live." Daniel reached out a trembling hand. Luke took it in both of his, steady and firm. I stood in the doorway, the weight of it all hitting me like a wave. Two men who had once been torn apart by fate were now standing in the same room, their hands clasped over the space where blood and memory met. Daniel looked at me with tear-glossed eyes and whispered, "I have a brother. I'm not alone." I walked in, leaned down, and kissed his forehead. "You never were." Luke's test results came back faster than anyone expected. Maybe it was urgency. Maybe it was divine alignment. The doctors said they were pushing everything through. Daniel's levels were crashing too fast to wait. I sat in the hallway outside the lab, cold coffee untouched in my hands, watching the second hand on the wall clock crawl like it was dragging time uphill. Luke paced in front of me, his boots echoing on the tile. For someone who had barely known Daniel existed 24 hours ago, he carried the weight like it had always been his to bear. When the hematologist finally walked toward us, clipboard in hand, her face gave everything away before she even spoke. Not sorrow, not sympathy, but something else. Something rare. "He's a strong match," she said softly. "One of the best we've seen." The cup slipped from my fingers and hit the floor, cold coffee seeping across the linoleum like a silent exhale. I didn't care. I was already crying. Luke just stared at her, stunned. "So, I can do it?" he asked, like he needed permission to be a miracle. The doctor nodded. "You're not just a match. You're his best chance." He blinked a few times, then nodded like he was bracing himself. "Then let's do it." That night, the three of us sat together in Daniel's room. Luke pulled up a chair beside the bed, the two of them silent at first. I stood near the doorway, giving them space, unsure if I was watching the beginning of something or the mending of something lost. Daniel's voice cracked when he spoke. "I used to dream about having a brother," he said, eyes on the ceiling. "It felt like a stupid dream, like wanting to live in a house you'll never afford. But now you're here. Real." Luke laughed once, quiet and rough. "Guess life had other plans." There was a pause. Then he added, "I'm sorry I wasn't there. I didn't even know." Daniel shook his head. "You don't have to be sorry. You're here now." And then, almost as an afterthought, "That's what matters." They didn't need years of shared memories to understand each other. Sometimes, pain does the bonding for you. When I walked back into the room, Daniel turned to me, his eyes glossy but steady. "I have a brother," he said again, like saying it out loud would help him believe it. "I'm not alone." I kissed his forehead and whispered back, "You never were." That moment hung in the room like incense, slow, sacred, unforgettable. I don't think I'll ever forget how Luke reached over and squeezed Daniel's hand, anchoring him to something more powerful than medicine: family. The next morning, the procedure was scheduled. Early. The sun hadn't even risen when we gathered in the prep room. Luke was already in his gown, IV in place, cracking jokes to the nurse about donating his marrow to some guy I met yesterday. Then he looked at Daniel, who sat in his wheelchair wrapped in blankets, and added with quiet conviction, "But I'm glad it's him." The nurse smiled, not knowing the weight behind those words. I did. I felt it all: the fear, the hope, the defiance. As they wheeled Luke into the operating room, I touched his shoulder. "Thank you," I said, meaning it in every language grief has ever spoken. He nodded once. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when he's walking out of here." And then he was gone behind the silver doors. The hours crawled. Hospital time doesn't follow clocks. It moves on heartbeats and lab results and breathless waiting. I sat in Daniel's room holding his hand, tracing the lines in his skin like I could protect him by touch alone. The transplant went smoothly, they said. A textbook procedure. But textbooks never prepare you for the after, for the silence, for the wondering. We waited. We prayed. We watched every number on the monitors like gamblers watching a roulette wheel. And then, slowly, Daniel's color began to return. Not all at once, just the faintest flush in his cheeks. A steadier grip. A little less effort to keep his eyes open. He was still weak, still tethered to machines. But something had shifted. The marrow was working. Life was returning. Luke came in that evening, looking pale and tired but calm. He sat beside Daniel's bed and held out his hand. Daniel took it without hesitation. "You just gave me a second chance," he whispered. Luke smiled with that quiet humility I was beginning to recognize in him. "You gave me something too," he said. "You gave me family." I turned away, tears breaking free again, not out of sorrow, but relief. Raw and holy. This wasn't the end of the story. For the first time in what felt like years, it was finally the beginning. The weeks after the transplant felt like waking up in a house that had once burned down but now smelled of paint and new wood. Everything was fragile, unfamiliar, but alive. Every morning, I'd sit beside Daniel and study him for signs of change: the pink returning to his skin, the steadiness in his voice, the slow but unmistakable rise of strength in his hands. He still tired easily, still moved with care, like he was learning to live in his own body again. But he was healing. Slowly, surely. The machines that once kept time like a metronome of dread began to fall silent, one by one. And in their absence, there was something louder. Hope, pulsing through the walls like music.